The room was silent, though the city outside pulsed with its endless noise. Michael Bloomberg sat alone, his reflection in the wide office window fractured by the lights of Manhattan. Towers of glass and steel rose like monuments of ambition. Yet in that reflection, he saw not just his empire, but the shadow of the moment that had created it. It wasn't victory he saw in that glass. It was the cost. The decision that defined him had not been made in triumph. It had been born from humiliation. The day he was forced out of Salomon Brothers, a firm he had poured his life into, where he believed he had secured permanence, he walked through its doors for the last, time carrying nothing but a severance check and the bitterness of betrayal. For years, he had built systems, earned trust, negotiated deals. He had given the firm his loyalty, his ingenuity, and his sweat. Yet loyalty is a fragile currency on Wall Street, and when the leadership decided his time was over, they dismissed him without hesitation. That day he learned the truth every titan eventually discovers. In the corridors of money, permanence is an illusion. One decision by others had ended his career, but one decision of his own could reshape his destiny. He remembers the air in those weeks after the suffocating weight of uncertainty. He was not young anymore. Starting over in his 40s was not just a risk. It was a gamble most men would have walked away from. But Bloomberg had always lived in calculation, in the precision of numbers. And beneath the humiliation, there was clarity. The world was changing. Information, once scattered and guarded, was becoming the true currency of power. Traders, bankers, investors, they all moved blindly, relying on whispers and scraps of data. What if someone could bring order to that chaos? What if the streams of numbers could be transformed into a language anyone in finance could read? The thought haunted him. At night, lying awake, he would see rows of numbers glowing in the dark, as though demanding to be given form. He could almost hear them, not as noise, but as a symphony waiting for its conductor. That was the seed. And the decision to pursue it, reckless as it seemed, was his only chance to turn betrayal into empire. He took his severance money, $10 million, a fortune for most men, but for Bloomberg, a lifeline with only one use. He poured it into the dream, refusing safety, refusing comfort. He would not fade into obscurity. If Wall Street had cast him aside, he would build something Wall Street could not ignore. The early days were grim. The machines were heavy, clumsy by today's standards, boxes of hardware assembled like desperate prayers. The software was raw, unstable, breaking more often than it worked. Yet every time the system flickered alive, every time the screen displayed financial information faster and more organized than anything else in the world, Bloomberg felt the vindication of his gamble. He knew he was holding the future in his hands. But knowing and convincing are different things. The bankers he pitched to looked at him with suspicion, some with mockery. Who was this man, ousted from a firm, clinging to an idea built on stubbornness? They had money, they had stability. He had nothing but a prototype, and a hunger sharpened by rejection. Still, hunger can persuade in ways wealth never will. Bloomberg carried his machines into offices, demonstrating them himself, adjusting cables, fixing bugs in real time while executives rolled their eyes. He stood in rooms where silence was meant to humiliate him and turned that silence into attention by refusing to stop speaking. When the first banks began to subscribe, not out of generosity but out of curiosity, Bloomberg knew the tide had begun to turn. And then came Merrill Lynch. Their subscription, their belief, was not just a client win, it was validation. The system was no longer a curiosity, it was a weapon. Suddenly, other firms could not afford to ignore him. His machines spread across trading floors, glowing screens filled with colors and numbers that made the invisible visible, that turned chaos into clarity. Bloomberg had not just returned to Wall Street, he had remade it in his image. But with every subscription, with every glowing screen, The weight of his decision deepened. Success does not erase betrayal. It merely buries it beneath layers of responsibility. Each client was not just a victory, but a chain binding him to endless growth. The empire grew, and so did the demands. The man who once dreamed of liberating information now found himself policing it, controlling it, selling it. The numbers he had freed became the numbers he owned. And yet, it was that single moment, walking out of Salomon Brothers with the bitterness of exile, that echoed in every choice after. He often wondered what would have become of him if he had chosen safety instead. If he had taken the severance, lived comfortably, retired quietly. Would he have known peace? Or would regret have gnawed at him in silence? The truth is, ambition leaves no room for peace. His decision had given him billions, had given him the mayoralty of New York, had written his name into the history of finance and politics, but it had also cost him the ability to be ordinary. He still remembers the night the first terminal flickered alive. The dark room lit by that strange glow, the hum of a machine that felt less like invention and more like prophecy. It was not triumph he felt, but a strange unease, as though he had opened a door that could never be closed. Every fortune carries its shadow, and he knew even then that he had stepped into one. Years later, when his empire towered above the city, when screens filled offices in every corner of the globe, when his wealth surpassed imagination, Bloomberg would sit by the window at night, watching the lights of New York shimmer against the glass. The reflection of power is seductive, but in it he saw something else too. The man walking away from Salomon Brothers, holding nothing but his severance check. That man had died the moment he chose to gamble everything. What remained was someone else, someone the world admired, envied, even feared, but rarely loved. Because every decision comes with a price, and the higher the price, the lonelier the throne. He knew it then, and he knows it now, that his fortune was not born from genius alone, but from the cruel alchemy of rejection and defiance. That single decision to risk it all, on a vision no one else believed in, was both his salvation and his curse. The shadow of that day has never left him. The city never truly sleeps, but in the late hours, when the horns and sirens fade into a distant hum, New York becomes something else. A mirror. Michael Bloomberg often found himself awake at those hours, standing before the glass that separated him from the city he once governed, the city his machines once reshaped. In the stillness, his mind would drift back not to the victories he paraded in public, but to the decisions that weighed on him in private. The decision that created Bloomberg LP had been a triumph, yes, but it was not the only one. There was another, more dangerous decision, one that placed him in the brutal theater of politics. It began as a whisper, a thought too absurd to be voiced aloud. A man of finance, a merchant of information, why would he wade into the chaos of governing? But ambition has a way of mutating, of seeking new arenas once the old ones have been conquered. For Bloomberg, the trading floor had been his battlefield. Now it would be City Hall. The risk was monumental. Politics is not numbers. It cannot be calculated, controlled, or automated. It is blood and perception, loyalty and betrayal. To enter it meant exposing himself, his fortune, his reputation, to the unpredictable storm of public opinion. And yet, as with Salomon Brothers years before, he found himself standing again before the abyss of choice. He could remain in the empire he had built, king of terminals and markets. Or he could gamble everything on a new vision, that money could buy not just influence, but legitimacy. He chose to leap. The campaign was merciless. They called him a billionaire trying to purchase democracy, a technocrat without soul, a businessman unfit to govern a city scarred by inequality and pain. Every insult burned, but Bloomberg had long ago learned to convert humiliation into fuel. He poured his fortune into the race, not sparingly, but lavishly, as though drowning doubt with sheer weight of dollars. Television screens, Radio airwaves, city billboards, his name, his face, his promise of efficiency and order seeped into every corner of New York. And then, against the odds, he won. The night of his victory should have been intoxicating. The cheers, the headlines, the rush of power. But standing in the mayor's office for the first time, he felt not triumph, but gravity. The responsibility of millions pressing down like a weight heavier than any fortune. In finance, numbers bend to skill. In politics, people break under expectation. The decision to become mayor was his second great gamble, and though it secured his place in history, it came with scars that even billions could not hide. He remembers the aftermath of 9/11s, the city bleeding, the skyline torn open. Decisions had to be made swift, merciless, and without certainty. He was no longer moving numbers across a screen. He was moving lives, shaping futures with words and decrees that could not be undone. And it was in those days that he discovered the darker truth of ambition, that leadership is not about glory, but sacrifice. He sacrificed privacy, friendships, even parts of himself. The billionaire, who once controlled information, now found himself drowning in its reports, protests, accusations, demands. Every decision, no matter how well-intended, fractured someone's life. Every solution birthed another problem. He kept a face of steel, a mask of confidence. But alone at night, the questions clawed at him. Had he overstepped? Had his hunger for new arenas condemned him to a throne built on unrest? He could not resign from this empire as easily as he had walked out of Salomon Brothers. This was not an office he could be pushed from without consequence. This was power tied not just to his name, but to the lives of millions who depended on him. And still, he endured. He reshaped the city's policies, imposed his will on its schools, its health, its safety. Some called it vision, others tyranny. But Bloomberg knew the truth. It was the same as it had always been. One decision after another, each carrying a price, each adding to the shadow that followed him. Years later, when he stepped down, when the office no longer belonged to him, he believed he had escaped. He returned to his company, his empire of terminals, his billions stacked higher than ever. But escape is an illusion. The weight of leadership does not vanish. It lingers like an echo, replaying the faces of those who cursed him, those who praised him, those who were broken or saved by his choices. And so he returned to the solitude of his office window, staring at the skyline he once ruled. He knew the world called him a success story, a self-made titan, a man who had conquered 2 empires. But success, he understood, was a word spoken by those who never bore its cost. Because the truth is darker. The decision that gave him Bloomberg LP had been born in exile. The decision that gave him New York had been born in pride. Both had elevated him, but both had taken pieces he would never recover. His billions bought him security, but not peace. His offices stood as monuments, yet in their silence, he could hear the same voice that haunted him since the day he left Salomon Brothers. Was it worth it? He does not answer the question anymore. Not to himself. Not to the shadows that linger in his glass reflection. Because some decisions, once made, cannot be weighed in words. They can only be lived, endured, carried like scars. Michael Bloomberg is a man who turned humiliation into empire, who turned ambition into governance. Yet even he knows the secret every empire conceals. The higher you rise, the colder it becomes. And when the applause fades, when the numbers stop flickering, when the office is empty and the city sleeps, you are left alone with the echo of the moment that changed everything. The decision, the one that gave you everything, the one that took everything too.